All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today I'll be doing my 2022 Sun Belt predictions. There are going to be timestamps below if you'd like to skip around, as I'll be lightly touching on every team. And to cap things off, I'll be doing some awards and our conference championship prediction. In Group A, Appalachian State, I have them claiming this division. 13 starters are back total. Chase Bryce at quarterback. He was really good last season after coming over from Clemson. Did a lot of great things with them through the air. They got a great backfield here of Nate Noel, 1,126 yards, and Cam Peoples, he was just shy of 1,000 yards with 926 of his own. But he had 14 touchdowns. Dietrich Harrington is also still there. So they have a deep backfield. They're going to want to run the ball as much as possible out of that pistol set, and I think they do a very good job of doing so. They lose a great deal of production here at pass catcher. Christian Wells, 5'11", 180. He's next up. Christian Horn, Deshaun Davis, a few of the veterans. They do add 2 transfers as well. 4 starters are back on the offensive line, and the redshirt freshman center they have. So the offensive line, they're in pretty good shape. Pass catching, we'll see what happens with them. I do think that this is a sound offense altogether, though, because they have the experience under center, because Bryce was so good for them. And then I love this backfield, Noel and Peoples. These guys are just so fun to watch anytime you get a chance. Make sure you tune in. The defense for App State, allowed 22 points per game last year, 344 yards per game. They lose numerous stars, but get a few back as well. Outside linebacker Nick Hampton, 68 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, and 11 sacks for him. Braden Harrington, 31 tackles, 5 TFL. He's next up at linebacker. They only allowed 122 rushing yards per game, so this front seven, they're pretty sound. They're pretty disciplined. They get after it. The secondary, they have a few vets coming back. A 57% completion rate allowed by opponents. They had 15 picks. This was a very active secondary. Stephen Jones, 5 picks and 8 pass breakups. He had 3 touchdowns as well. So this is a pretty good defense, pretty good football team altogether. They should have no problems wrapping up this division, even though it is very competitive, like Coastal Carolina here at number 2. Look at number 2, I have Georgia State, kind of a shocker here, but they're red hot at the end of the year. I think they won 6 out of their last 7, steaming hot into the postseason. They returned 15 starters, 28 points per game for this offense that has some pretty solid balance. Darian Granger broke out at quarterback, 115 yards as a passer, 19-4 TD to INT ratio, ran for 646 and 3 scores. They're going to pair him up with Tucker Craig, who had 953 and 9 touchdowns, and Jameis Williams, who had 859 and 9 touchdowns. 224 rushing yards per game for this offense, and the top 3 pieces are back. I think the sky's the limit for these guys. They could seriously approach 250 per game. Wide receiver Jamari Thrash, he led the team in receptions and yards with 32 grabs for 452 yards. Avery Payne at tight end. He had 7 touchdowns and 251 yards himself. So not many guys are back in the receiving game besides those 2 assets right there. Jasilas Cradle, he's 4th on the team in yards as well. So I think they're pretty solid at wide receiver. 4 starters are also back on the offensive line. A unit that was quite strong last year. So this running game is really going to lead the charge. The defense progressed immensely, though. 38 sacks, but they allowed over 27 points per game. They struggled on third downs. They were 109th versus the pass. I do like Thomas Gore, defensive tackle. Linebackers, Jordan Venezuela, who was the leading tackler for them last year, and Jamil Muhammad. Those guys are quite solid for them. And Octavius Lane at safety, I was very thrilled with his effort last season. 81 tackles, 5 picks, 6 pass breakups. I have them at number 2 with Coastal Carolina at 3 just because they lose so much on defense. And I love this running game and this offensive line. These guys are going to be quite sound, I would say, up front. They're really going to control the tempo, and that's really going to be hard for opponents. 6 returning starters, though, for Coastal Carolina. Grayson McCall is one of them. He's been exceptional the first 2 years. He really runs this option offense terrifically. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the country. Love what he does through the air. Great command as well. Great speed. Nice vision as a runner. I like what he can do on that front. They get back to 2 top running backs as well. Well, now they weren't the top 2 backs, but they were pretty good last year. Reese White, 515 and 7 scores, 7.1 yards per carry. Brain Bennett was better. He had 636 and 7 scores, 8.5 yards per carry. They lose their top options at pass catcher. That's obviously a big concern. The highest returning wide receiver or tight end is Xavier Gravett, who had 5 grabs for 95 yards. They did pick up Sam Pickney as a Georgia State transfer. Tyson Mobley and Jared Brown are back as well, but there's not much returning experience here in the receiving core at all. Only 2 starters are back on the offensive line, but they're 2 really good ones. Right tackle Antoine Lopez, he was one of the top at his position in the conference, and the same could be said about center Willie Lampkin. So I think they're going to be doing just fine on offense because they get that great quarterback back along with 2 running backs. So through the air, it's kind of an issue, but I think they'll get those running backs involved if they have to through the air. Defense, they only get back 3 starters, 21.6 points per game allowed last season, which is outstanding. Gerard Clark, 6'4", 345 at nose, 33 tackles and 4 TFL. Along with edge Josiah Stewart, who was a breakout freshman for them last year, 15.5 tackles for loss, 12.5 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. And then cornerback Jordan Strong, 10 pass breakups, 28 tackles. He was a standout for them. They do add 7 transfers, and I do think guys like Adrian Hope, Travis Geiger at defensive tackle, and Tobias Fletcher at safety, these guys are all going to have to step up they're veterans at this point, so they do lose a lot. They do a good bit back, and I think that's going to, it's going to be hard to reload this defense. So I do have them falling in third here in Group A. Marshall, they're going to make their long. Number 4, Marshall, they come over from the CUSA. They're now in the Sun Belt. Henry Colombi, he's on the move for the third time. He replaces Grant Wells, played in a pass-heavy scheme with Matt Wells at 2 different schools. So he's going to fit right into Charles Huff's offense. 38 attempts per game from this offense through the air. They're going to want that tempo and volume out of Colombi. So I think he'll be able to provide that. Rasheen Ali, at running back, 1,400 yards, 23 touchdowns. His lone kick return attempt went 97 yards for a score. 334 receiving, 6'2", 201, very shifty for his size, 20-plus touches per game. It's insane what he was able to do last year. We'll see what kind of role he's used in this year because, obviously he touched the ball a lot. They also have Kalan LeBourne, a Florida State transfer, former 5-star. They're going to pair up with him, hopefully, in the backfield. They return 2 of the top 4 pass catchers. Corey Gamage, 6'4", 220, good downfield playmaker, 78 receptions, 869 yards. Only 2 touchdowns with Gamage. Those numbers are certainly going to continue to improve this fall. Shahid Ahmad, 172 pounds, but he had 463 yards and 3 scores. Talik Keaton, Jaden Harrison, these guys are, they had 269 and 268 yards respectively last season. So they had some guys coming. The 54.7% opponent completion rate was 5th in FBS. The secondary played very good, and they get their 2 standout corners back. Stephen Gilmore at corner, 3 picks, 8 pass breakups. He had 50-plus tackles as well. Micah Abraham, 14 pass breakups on the other side. Those guys were elite for them last year. Run defense was a big struggle, though. They were 105th in that category, about 192 yards per game on the ground. They do add a few transfers on the interior D-line. Anthony Watts from Purdue being one of them. The 2 top tacklers are back as well. Linebacker Abraham Buplain, 110 tackles, 10 TFL, and then Eli Neal, he had 97 stops for 7 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. So Neal was phenomenal for them. I like this defense. I'm kind of concerned about the offense because Colombi, he's not really impressed me in his time, and I think this offense might be a little too one-dimensional. I think they have some pretty sound balance overall, but there is, some really good teams in this division. So 4th for me. Old Dominion here at number 5. They made the postseason, last fall and lost a number of close games. So I think they can certainly progress tremendously this year. Hayden Wolf, 194 passing yards per game, 10-7 TD to INT ratio. They still have DJ Mack as well at quarterback. They need some short yardage pickups. 161 rush yards per game. The top 2 rushers are back. Blake Watson, 1,121 yards, 8 touchdowns, 101 yards per game. Elijah Davis had 569 and 6 scores. 4 starters are back on the offensive line, so I think they're going to continue to get better at grounding and pounding. Ali Jennings, the West Virginia transfer, was good for them last year, just north of 1,000 yards. He had 61 receptions. And then tight end Zach Hunt, he was pretty solid. 72 grabs, 692 yards, 5 touchdowns. One of the better tight ends in all of college football. And Isaiah Page, he was 3rd in receptions and yards on this team. So they had experience back all around. I think this offense is going to be one to watch this season. The defense, 27 points per game allowed, 385 in terms of yards per game allowed. Safety, Artarian Johnson was good, 91 tackles. Plenty of experience back in the front 7, though. Jason Henderson, 79 stops as a freshman. Fellow linebacker Ryan Henry had 75. Marquise Haynes at defensive end. There's a few freshmen that got involved on the D-line, so I think they're really going to try and search and find that rotation really works for them this year. 103rd in pass defense, though. 28 touchdowns allowed, only 7 picks snagged, so the defense needs to continue to take steps forward. I think the offense certainly will. I think Old Dominion is a very interesting team this year. James Madison, they make the move over from the FCS level. Not much on these guys, other than they dominated at that level. 38 points per game last year in offense. Cole Johnson, the starting quarterback's gone. Todd Ciento, he transfers from Colorado State. He was pretty good last year for the Rams as well, though. So I think this is a pretty solid addition. He's going to jump back down here to the Sun Belt. Latrell Palmer, just shy of 1,000 yards running the ball. Chris Palmer, nearly 1,100 yards through the air at wide receiver. I'm not sure if those two are related or not. 3 starters are back on the offensive line, though. And the defense, this is really what led the charge for them at the FCS ranks. 15.4 points per game allowed, only 275 yards. That's really good. I didn't have many notes on these guys. I'm not sure who's coming back, but I think they'll be competitive. 33-5 over the last 3 years. And defensive lineman Isaac Ukwu, 16.5 tackles for loss, 9 sacks last year. Big step up here in competition for James Madison. Not the biggest step up, I would say, but it's pretty sizable. James Madison should be competitive right out of the gates. They will not be eligible for the postseason in any capacity this season. Looking at Georgia Southern rounding out the division, Clay Helton arrives, and it's going to be a big-time schematic change. It's going to cause this offense to likely drop below that 20-point per game mark, which that's going to be hard to do, but I think that's certainly what you're in store for. Kyler Van Treese, he's the new starter at quarterback. You're going to go away from that option. Van Treese was pretty solid at Buffalo. He's a good game manager. They ran the ball extremely well. They got solid runners back in Gerald Green, 423 and 5 scores a season ago, and then Jalen White, 383, and 4 touchdowns. They both had 5.6 yards per carry, so the efficiency was there. I'd like to see what they can do in a non-option set. Caleb Hood, he led the team with 35 receptions, 442 yards at wide receiver, and Devin Burgess, he wasn't bad, 17 grabs for 311. That's 18 yards per catch. So I like what they got at some of these skilled positions. 4 starters are back on an offensive line. They just struggled, and they allowed way too many sacks considering the few dropbacks they had. That's not something they did a whole lot, and the quarterback still managed to be on the floor most of the time. So work in progress for Georgia Southern. The defense, same can be said about them. 31 points per game allowed last fall, 6.5 yards per play. Those numbers are not good one bit. Justin Ellis, though, a key clog on the D-line, 7.5 TFLs, 5 sacks. 2 linebackers broke out last season, but they transfer out, unfortunately. They do get back some veterans in the secondary, though. Anthony Wilson led the team with 78 tackles, 9 pass breakups. I like Justin Birdsong and Tyler Bride as well. They provide some nice experience there. And I think the biggest of all is Derek Canteen. Only 2 games last year, but he was a breakout freshman in 2020 with 6 picks and 10 pass breakups. Really showcased his ball skills, was rock solid on his side of the field. Secondary should march forward a bit. It's not saying much considering they ranked 125th against the pass in college football last year, and then we snagged 5 picks. So Canteen, his ball skills coming back should do wonders for them, and I think they have a nice room for progression, but the offense, not very hopeful on because that schematic change is going to take a minute to figure out. Looking in Group B, Louisiana, big-time roster turnover and a coaching turnover. They still have some great leftover talent here. Michael Desmorox, he's been around since 2016, so he understands the philosophy here, left behind by Billy Napier. Chandler Fields, likely the replacement for Levi Lewis at quarterback. He gets Chris Smith back in the backfield, 856 and 6 scores, 5.6 yards per carry for him. Peter LeBlanc at wide receiver, 37 receptions, 417 yards. And Michael Jefferson, who had 27 yards per catch last season, 481 yards on 18 grabs. That's absolutely insane. Then Dante Fleming, he was third on the team in yards and receptions. So they got some receivers back. Chris Smith's going to lead the charge in the backfield. It's quite depleted now, but 2 seniors on the offensive line, that's just been phenomenal for them in Billy Napier's tenure. He developed those guys great, put a handful of them in the NFL, and Osiris Torrance is next, who actually went to Florida. So offense, I think they'll be just fine. Defensively, 18.5 points per game. This unit has also been elite for them. Zion Hill, Andre Jones on the defensive line, both had 9.5 tackles for loss last year. They're going to be the tone centers this fall. Braylon Trahan at safety, he stuck around. Eric Garneau, 2 picks, 7 pass breakups at corner. Those are 2 of the veterans in the secondary. Third in FBS and opponent completion rate, 53.1%. I think that short-term Louisiana is going to be pretty solid. Long-term, I think they'll start to cave in a little bit. But overall, they still got some good leftover talent on both sides of the ball. The philosophy has not changed, so they're going to want to ground and pound, play tough defense. I have them claiming this side of the division. Both of my number 2s are kind of shocked. I have Troy here. 9 starters are back on an offense. It was quite poor last season. They, scored less than 23 points per game, only 336 yards per game. That's not good. Garner Watson, though, he had 201 of those yards. 8 touchdowns, only 4 picks. Not much production on that front, but 61% completion rate. Those things are all going to have to go up this season. Plenty of production coming back at wide receiver. Was a youthful unit last year. Tess Johnson, 5'10", 160. 67 receptions for 735 and 4 touchdowns. Jabari Barber, similar size. He had 32 grabs for 324 yards. And they pick up 2 guys in the portal that provide size. 6'4", 224 is Rajay Johnson and Eric Shaw, 6'5", 212. So this is now a versatile group of pass catchers. It's going to be very fun to see how they attack opposing defenses this year. The running game needs to progress as well, especially since they get 4 starters back up front. Kamani Val, he's the top rusher, 696 and 5 touchdowns for them. 98.8 rush yards per game. That's obviously one of the nation's worst marks, so they need to improve on that front. I think the passing game, though, is pretty exciting because that versatile size they now possess. The defense, 26 points per game allowed is not, an accurate assessment of how good this unit was. Only 338 yards per game allowed. They're loaded. Javon Solomon was a breakout third-year freshman for them. 17 tackles for loss, 11 sacks. Richard Gibnor on the other side, 10 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. Those are 2 great edge rushers here for them, mixed in with Will Chola and Luis Medina, who are both 290-plus pounds on the interior D-line. To make things even better, 2 seniors at linebacker, along with 2 seniors are back at linebacker. None more important than Carlton Marshall. He's only 5'9", 210, but he plays with so much aggressiveness and fire. 127 tackles. 10 tackles for loss for Marshall. He is phenomenal. Should continue to progress versus the run. 195 pass yards per game allowed, 16 picks. Not many great standouts, but just a strong unit altogether. TJ Harris, 58 tackles, 2 picks. Troy, this defense, they're going to be really good. I like the edge presence they have, and then the veterans at linebacker, and then some of them in the secondary as well. This is going to be interesting. Troy Ball Club, I have them second. I do think they can compete for the Southern Miss. It's a brutal QB situation for them. 11 different players threw a pass. Couldn't stay healthy was the biggest issue. Trey Lowe, Ty Keys are back, though, from last year, so they have confidence in them as they don't bring anybody in from the portal to compete right away. good wide receiver in Jason Brownlee. Led the team in multiple categories by far. It was 46 receptions, 643 yards, and 8 scores. We're nowhere near being touched by anyone else. They do return their top 3 pass catchers as a whole, though, so that's encouraging. And then Frank Gore Jr., 801 yards, 5 touchdowns. Him and Dejon Richard, they should do pretty good work this year. 447 and 2 scores for him. 120 yards per game on the ground for USM. I really want to see that, continue the march forward. Only 17.7 points per game as an offense. Committed 31 turnovers, and that's not going to help out your defense that was phenomenal in the red zone. 28 points per game is not bad for how awful the offense was, allowing that much. Only 4 touchdowns. That's not bad one bit. Josh Ratliff, Josh Carr, 2 notable returnees on the D-line. Chantrell Latham, he was good at linebacker. 52 tackles, 7 tackles for loss. I liked TK Newsome as well. He was a solid freshman there at linebacker. Secondary, this was a strong unit last year. Malik Shorts, he's back, 89 tackles. He also had 2 picks and 7 pass breakups. Natrani Brooks was good last year, as was Jay Stanley, another returning veteran. 42nd in total defense. This was a good unit considering how young they were, mixed with a horrid offense. So I think USM has probably more potential than anybody. Maybe Troy has more potential than them, but USM, a lot of potential this year to turn things around. I think this is an interesting ball club for this season. We got South Alabama, 25 points per game for this offense. They add 7 transfers on offense. LaDamian Webb at running back is one of them from Florida State. Desmond Trotter, he was a good starter for them 2 years ago at quarterback. He's in a battle with Carter Bradley, who comes over from Toledo. Jake Bentley started last year, of course. 111 rush yards per game. They do have Webb along with 2 other transfers at running back, so they got some fresh meat in the backfield. Numerous productive pass catchers are back, despite Jalen Tolbert heading off to the NFL. Jalen Wayne, 53 receptions, 630 yards. Colin Lacey, 293 yards, but he had 41 receptions. And then tight end Lincoln Sefkic, 218 and 5 scores. I do think that this offense is going to be around kind of like it was last year. I think the running game needs to get more production, though, if they want to see some improvement. The defense, 26.4 points per game allowed, 5.4 yards per play. Kane Womack got plenty of starters back, though. Linebacker A.J. DeShazer, 64 tackles. Safety Keith Gilman, 59 tackles. Cornerback Darrell Luther, he's tremendous. 4 picks, 10 pass breakups a season ago. He's one of the nation's best at his position. He led the charge on the 32nd ranked pass defense in college football. Only 208 pass yards per game allowed, 15 picks compared to only 13 touchdowns they allowed. So these guys were great. Linebackers need to be better and more productive, though. I do like James Miller coming over from Indiana. He reunites with Womack, who was the defensive coordinator there just recently. 9 transfers on defense as well. They avoid the top teams in the East also, so we'll see what happens with South Alabama. It's an interesting ball club. They don't play many tough competitors, so I think they could definitely pad their win-loss record. But we'll see what happens with Kane Womack's squad. The State, only 23 points per game last year, along with 5.1 yards per play. But Lane Hatcher comes over from Arkansas State, a high-flying offense. He really knows how to operate. He also gets back some solid receivers as well. Javen Banks had 553 and 5 scores. Marcel Barbie, 499 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then Ashton Hawkins. all those guys had 30-plus receptions last year, so Hatcher has some weapons to work with, along with a solid ground attack led by Calvin Hall, who had 696 yards, and Jamil Jeter, 384. He also had pretty impressive number of 8 touchdowns. Jake Spavital, the offensive play caller here, he comes from Texas A&M. He's got an offensive mind, and I think he's got a pretty solid group to get things done this year. Offensive line needs to be better. Overall, balance needs to be a lot better. So we'll see what happens with Texas State. The defense was awful, though. 430 yards per game allowed, 33 points per game, 183 rushing yards per game allowed. They struggled versus the pass as well. Saloni Taiuapu, he was second on the team with 75 tackles. Zion Childress was solid at safety with 74 stops and 5 pass breakups. Jordan Revels and Isaac Nixon were solid off the edge. So I think Texas State, I don't expect them to do much, but they do have some standout players. They'll be fun to watch this year. Look at Arkansas State. Offense was not too bad. James Blackman threw for 224 pass yards per game, 8-4 TD to INT ratio. Completed just under 60% of his balls. The biggest problem with them is that 82 rushing yards per game, 2.8 yards per carry. 2 of the worst marks in college football on the ground on both sides. The defense was absolutely awful against the run, and obviously the ground game on the offense wasn't good either. They do add 2 transfers, Brian Snead, Jaquez Cross. Maybe they can add a spark. The top 2 pass catchers are back. T. Violence Hunt, 51 grabs for 740 yards, and Jeff Foreman, he had 31 receptions and 556 yards. So Blackman has 2 guys to work with. The job is now his because Hatcher is going to Texas State. Only 1 starter back on an offensive line that was one of the nation's worst. So the offense, they did have their key moments, but overall it was a pretty poor unit. Not much to say about the defense. 129th in total D, 130th against the run, and 124th in points per game allowed. Kevon Bennett, though, was a lone standout at defensive end. 16.5 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. So we'll see what happens. I just don't think the defense is going to be able to find a pulse. Butch Jones had a pretty good offseason, though. terms of recruiting. So long term, maybe they can start to figure things out. Not very hopeful. To cap things off, Louisiana Monroe, 21 points per game last year for an offense that was not really good. Chandler Rogers had 109 yards per game through the year, 9 touchdowns, only 3 picks. Top 2 pass catchers are back, though, added by Tyrone Howell, a Kansas State transfer. Will Derrick, 25 grabs for 353 yards. Boogie Knight, 45 receptions, 588 through the air. And then the ground game, Andrew Henry, pretty solid runner last year, as was Malik Jackson, because they both had 450-plus yards, running behind an offensive line that was just flat-out poor, 130 rushing yards per game. That's not a terrible mark. I think they can certainly progress on offense with these guys that are coming back in the skill positions. 14 transfers added on defense that allowed 33.5 points per game. Linebacker Zach Woodard, 89 tackles, 9 tackles for loss. Quay Drake, he had 56 stops as well. Sir Darius Ellis and Caleb Thomas, 6+ tackles for loss for them both. 125th ranked pass defense. They were 84th versus the run. I think they progress on that front because those guys, the key returnees on the front 7. Secondary, that was just flat out awful. They also lose their top corner in the offseason. Jabari Johnson, though, he was a notable at safety. ULM, that's it for me. And to cap things off, my conference title prediction and some awards. Appalachian State over Louisiana, getting revenge from last year's conference title game. I think the Mountaineers will win that contest whenever it arrives. I think this will be a pretty interesting battle. Louisiana is going to have no real challenges in that division, but Group A, 3 or 4 different teams could really win that and end up in this position, so I think that'll be a very fun battle to watch. Grayson McCall, he's going to have some heavy lifting to do this year. I think he'll win Offensive Player of the Year. On the Carlton Marshall for Troy, he's going to have tremendous numbers. He's going to do so much for that defense that I think is really going to shock some people. That front 7 can definitely lead the way. Southern Miss is my sleeper team. I talked about how the veterans and youth mixed into that defense that was really good last year. Their offense did them absolutely no favors, and I think they did more than hold their own considering how bad the offense was. So I think Southern Miss, pretty good sleeper team in this conference. Sean Elliott at Georgia State is Coach of the Year, as I do have them as the runner-up in their respective division. I think that offense is really going to have a lot of fun this year. So that's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.